Tonight, I'm excited to welcome Carmen Cauthen, who will be presenting our program on the Winn family. Washington Winn was Carmen's fifth great maternal grandfather. Carmen's mother was a Grady who grew up in Mount Olive. Carmen's a Raleigh native whose main focus is on community conversations. She is the founder of Research and Resource and works with clients providing ongoing research for various projects, copy editing, family history, racial equity discussions, and grant writing. Carmen is an avid researcher and community activist who writes and teaches about the history of Black America, Black Raleigh in particular, and her experiences in articles and presentations. I'm as excited as I'm sure you all are to hear Carmen's presentation. Let's welcome Ms. Cauthen.
But thank you so much for having me and for coming out. As Paige said, my fifth great grandfather was Adam Winn. And I'm just going to start here because the Winns on my part of the family were not always in Mount Olive. They were started out in Duplin County, and they migrated all over the place. So my generation and beyond are literally all over the country and a few in other countries. The history of Mount Olive and the Winn family are always going to be like this. So tonight what we're going to talk about is where the Winns came from. Historically speaking, what did that look like? And what other kinds of contributions did they make? And I see people writing. If you want, after I finish tonight, if you want to leave, I'll put some paper up here. If you want to leave me your email addresses, I'd be happy to email you the written presentation and the PowerPoint. They're all of it's not in one, all of it's in the written, but it's easier for me, I know, when I can find somebody's written stuff and go, oh, I got that from here, and it helps me when I'm putting stuff in ancestry or writing an article or something. So I'd be happy to do that if you all want that. Okay, so verbal and oral history has led us, particularly in our family, to believe that the origin of the Winns was Indian. However, as some of us have had our DNA done, we found that there's not very much Indian in our family. So we don't know exactly where the origin has come from. I had one cousin whose her father's family was Indian, and her mother's family was Indian, and she came up with only 2%. So she thought something was wrong and went back and had another test done by another company and came up with the same thing. So we are still digging to find out some more of that information. So the information I'm going to share tonight comes from deeds, manumission records from Duplin and Wayne counties, the North Carolina Department of Archives and History in Raleigh, United States Census records. There's a book, The Heritage of Wayne County, which was coordinated by Mary Daniels Johnston for the Wayne County Historical Society, and the Old Dobbs County Genealogical Society, and oral history stuff that my parents and grandparents have told us and have passed things down through history. So we're going to start with the 1790 census records from Duplin County Register of Deeds. King George III issued deeds somewhere between 200 and 300 acres of land to Adam Winn. He was considered a free person of color. He was considered of Indian descent. The first census shows him as free issue. That was in 1780. But other records, as I said, have said Indian heritage and mixed marriages. So I was telling somebody, we've got WINNs, WYNNs. I see them in Dudley. I see them in Duplin. I see them in Wayne, all over Wayne County. So that original land that was done, was granted was in Duplin County. And Adam had 5 sons, Gray, Charles, Levi, Washington, and Adam. And as the family grew, the land holdings grew. Are you all able to hear? Okay, let me try this, Mike. How's that? Is that any better? Okay. So as the family grew, the land holdings grew. So I'm thinking it's no different than when I was growing up. My father was a pharmacist. His father was a pharmacist. They both had drugstores. They kind of drilled business into us, whether we wanted it or not. And my mother, her sisters, all of them were teachers. I ran from education, although I've learned that really is what I am, an educator. But the whole while I was in school and working, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to be in a classroom. So I think, we just kind of naturally learn the things that our parents do, and some of that gets in us whether we want it to or not. So the family continued to purchase tracts of land. And let me skip over to the next slide. This shows again what I just mentioned about King George III's granting of land. And eventually there was a total of 2,041 and a half acres of land. That was between Duplin and Wayne County. And as early as 1837, the land was referred to as cow pasture branch. And part of that land was what is now Mount Olive. Not all of it, like I said, some was in Duplin, some was in Wayne. The land was also, and when you look on maps, and I did not put a map in my slides, but there are some maps that show Winn Town up until the early 1900s. And sometimes it was called the village of Winnsboro. So we have not found any marriage records for Adam. That doesn't mean he wasn't married. Sometimes people didn't record their marriages at the courthouse. So, that's why we have to look everywhere we can to find our history. Jenny, we're not sure because census records often spell things wrong, was the mother of his children. And she actually made the first purchase of land in Wayne County via Winn. She purchased 100 acres from Ezekiel Norris in the lower part of the county in 1836. Married women were not allowed to carry property in their names, in their married names. It had to be in the husband's name, or they could if they were widowed, but that wasn't married anymore. So the land shows up in her name and not in a man's name first. Let's try the next slide. On September 18, 1834, John Carnegie deeded land to Adam Winn that was located in the northeast, or the swamp, or Crecosan section. Both men were residents of Duplin County, but the land is part of present-day Mount Olive. So I have not dug back to see where county lines changed and when they changed. A lot of what I have is what my mother and my aunts pulled, and I've been doing a little more digging, but not as much on Mount Olive and Wayne County and the Winns as I have been trying to make sure that the history in Raleigh is not completely lost, because they're trying to get rid of it faster. We've held on to some more stuff here in Wayne. So between 1790 and 1860, there were an estimated 700 to 900 free persons of color in Wayne County. 3 of those households belonged to a family named Burnett, and 6 belonged to the Winn family. We're going to go to railroad history because that's where this all starts to come together. So in January of 1834, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a bill to incorporate the Wilmington and Raleigh Railroad. The terms of the charter were very restrictive, and they had to pass an amended charter in December of 1835, and it altered the course of the railroad because the railroad originally was not supposed to come through Mount Olive. They decided that they wanted it to go to Weldon. So they altered the course, which brought it through Faison and up through Mount Olive. And they provided $1.5 million in capital stock from the government. So the government, the state government, was all tied up in this is what they wanted to see do. They thought the railroad was the wave of the future. At the same time, they were really trying to connect the port in Wilmington with the city of Raleigh. So that was when they decided, it was better to come through Wilmington and to turn at Faison. So then they changed the name to the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad. So on March 20th, 1838, Adam Winn deeded the right-of-way through his land to the Wilmington and Raleigh Railroad for $19. Now, what I have read and what I have discovered is, I can't think of the names, Flowers and, I've forgotten the other man's name. The two white men gave their land for $1 because they thought it was the thing to do. Now consider, black people didn't have a whole lot of land to begin with. And after slavery, there were more people to get it. And we understood, after having been enslaved or having been tricked out of property, or in the Winn family, Adam in particular, losing land for debt a lot, that you need to hold on to that stuff. You don't be giving it up for some folks who want to do something else with it. So they sued him twice to get the land. They sued him in 1837 and they sued him in 1838. And the directors, so what it says is the directors of the railroad appealed to the Wayne County Court of Pleas and Quarter Sessions to force him to sell. That's kind of like eminent domain today. Not the same name, but it's the same process. And so we don't like that. We don't want to always be giving up our stuff for little or no money. But that was what happened. And so I think that's why he got $19 for his land, which, I'd love to buy some land for $19 today. And especially in Raleigh, I can't get a tenth of an acre. I'm getting ready to put my house on the market in Raleigh. It's a tenth of an acre, and I'm charging $550 for it. So land costs are crazy expensive, and the people are buying land in Raleigh just to tear whatever house is down on it to build something new that costs more than what they, it's just crazy to me. So on March, and we think that land was Center Street, and of course, in most southern towns particularly, the railroad goes down the street, it divides the street either between the haves and the have-nots, or the blacks and the whites, or the poor and the rich. That's the way our southern towns that were around railroads were set up. So on March 7th, 1840, when the last spike was driven into the railroad, it was 161.5 miles long, and it was the longest railroad in the world. So some other land sales that I'm going to talk about. Levi Winn owned a small cabin on family property that was probably built in the 1840s. And a number of you may know this story. The lot that it was sitting on was sold in 1855 to a Miss Elizabeth Flowers. And the cabin was incorporated into the plans for the house that was built for her, and is now the present kitchen section of that house. It was connected to the house by breezeway. Back then there was not any way to keep all that smell and heat out of the house. So there was generally, you knew if you had more money because there was a breezeway to keep that separate. And that house sits on the corner of James and Center Streets today. And according to the Wayne County Register of Deeds, Levi Winn sold an additional 235 acres of land for the village of Mount Olive in 1840. So just because I find this interesting, I find it interesting how we colorize people in America, how race was created to keep people who were not white from being able to move forward in the way that white people were. So there was never a consistent description of black, brown, they didn't call us African American back then. I remember my grandmother, we had to talk her out of nigger. We had, get her over to colored. And then it was really hard to get her from colored to black. And I don't think she was still living when they started calling us African American. But, they got used to hearing it all the time. They called each other the same thing. So in the 1780 census, the Winns showed up as free issue. In 1790, they were free. He was a free person of color. In 1850, they were mulattoes. In 1860, they were black. And there was big argument over the last 3 or 4 years about what to term people when they were doing the census. So it's it's been continually changing. Free people of color were often ignored by the census taker. So you might not find your family members in census. And if your street was divided, so black people lived on one side and white people lived on the other side, they may only have taken the census on one side because they were only going to count the white people. Black people weren't as important. It's just like slaves might have been counted, but there might have been a name and an age, and that was it. Or they might not be in there at all. They may just be in a record of the field hands and listed after the animals. So, you never were sure what pride of place black people had in a family. Names were often misspelled. That has nothing to do with race. That's just, I think people just didn't ask the spelling. They just wrote down what they thought they heard. And it could be anything. And as I said earlier, many marriages were not registered at the courthouse. Could have been jumping the broom. Could have been you actually had a ceremony, but you just never. I'm sure it costs money to register at the courthouse. That's sometimes you just didn't have that to do. So now, this is the part that we don't like to talk about in my family. But the Winns owned slaves. And when the first time my mother told me that, I was like, how did black people own slaves? That didn't make any sense to me at all. But the most bizarre part of that to me was his slaves were his children. His children's mother was a slave, but he would use his children as collateral on loans, or if he was buying property. He would send his children. They would write up a contract, and his children would be sent to work for someone he was buying property from, and that was part of how the payment was made. Makes no sense to me. I couldn't do it, but I didn't live in those times. I don't understand what the understanding was. So Lisa Henderson, who lives in Wilson, does a lot of research and has been, and I have found some very interesting information in what she has done. But one of the things that she talked about was the fact that the children had become a man's slaves, and sometimes there were sheriff cells because he could not make his payments. So he had gone into debt and was about to lose his property or lost his property, and the children became eligible for sale to somebody else at that point. And sometimes they were sold. And that was from an article called in the North Carolina State in March of 1852. There was a case, William K. Lane versus Jane Bennett. It was removed from the Wayne County Court of Equity. A gentleman named Fornifold Jernigan had made provisions in his will for the disposal of his slaves after he died. And his widow, Jane Jernigan, married Thomas Bennett, and he left 13 slaves to his wife, which became the property of her new husband. That included Bill Winn, John Winn, Simpson, and Ann. And he left 8 slaves to his daughter, Mary Ann Kelly. One of them was Olive Winn. He provided for the liberation of the Negroes Dave, Tom, Morris, Lila, and Mary, and provided for their transportation to a free state And then the 10 slaves that had been named had to be sold. Now, he left them to somebody, but then they had to be sold in order for those family members to get money. So, before the legacies were paid out, Adam Winn filed suit to recover John, Bill, Simpson, Ann, Olive, and Dave, claiming, number one, that he had mortgaged the slaves to Jernigan to secure payment of money that Jernigan had loaned to him. And two, he had a judgment saying that he had repaid the money and the slaves had come back to him, had been reconveyed. So you see, you needed, even then, you needed to really know the law. You needed to know, you needed not only know business, but you needed to know the law. So the executors filed a bill with the court seeking guidance because they didn't know what to do. And so Jane and Marianne Kelly, the two women who were left slaves, claimed that the full value of the slaves that had been bequeathed to them, or when Levi needed to pay them that money, because he said he paid it to the husband. The husband was dead, so I guess they figured they didn't get any of the money. And so the court found that each of the women was entitled to the amount of the redemption. So he had to come up with the money again. So these are pieces of history we don't necessarily expect to find, and a lot of times we don't. Those aren't stories that we hear. Sometimes those are things that we find in newspapers. I don't know if any of you all are involved on Ancestry.com, but there is also a website called newspapers.com, and I bought a subscription, and sometimes when I have some time, I will just take one of my family names and just put in their last name in quotes and put in where I'm looking, what city or county, and see what shows up. I mean, it takes a little while to sit there and go through the newspaper clippings, and then you have to sometimes think of other ways to look for them other than what or what you've been told, or take a little piece of a story, because you don't know how things are going to be written. It depends, and part of it depends on who the editor of the newspaper at the time was. If I'm looking for something from the News and Observer or Josephus Daniels, I don't look for anything good. I don't expect to get anything good. Although, every once in a while, he said something good. But other newspapers are not as disparaging of Negroes as he was. So this $200 reward over here, let me read that one, please. Wrong. Runaway from the subscriber on the 23rd something. 4 Negro boys named as follows: Charles Winn, aged about 21, William, aged about 17 years, John, aged 14 years, Jim, aged about 12 years. The above boys are very well known as the children of Adam Winn. I think they intend trying to get to some free state. The above reward will be given for their delivery or for their confinement in any jail in the state. Thomas Bennett, dated July 27, 1854, in Mount Olive. And this is the same man who died and left these slaves to his wife and daughter. So people put ads in the newspaper all the time for runaway slaves with a reward amount, and the person didn't have to bring them back to them. They could just take them to the jail and tell the jailer to hold them until the owner came to pick them up. And it's not fascinating, but it is, to read how much four men were worth $50 a piece. It was a lot of money back then. That was more than Winn got paid for the land. He only got $19 for all that acreage. So if they were strong, if the slave was strong and able to do work, they were, and particularly male, they were very well. People were very well rewarded for bringing them back. All right. So over mortgaging caused Adam Winn to lose a lot of his land, and I think with this next between then in 1860, Adam, Levi, Washington, and James Winn were sued for debt 22 times. And judgments were entered in the amount of $5,000. Adam was never able to recover from those financial losses. And those losses acquired other people in the community to acquire his land. And we know that all too often today. Families don't pay taxes on land that they have, and it disappears. So while the Winn family was known for being large landowners, using their children or slaves for collateral for loans, they were also blacksmiths, farmers, mechanics, carpenters, distillers, doctors, preachers, and educators. Okay. So during Reconstruction, after the Civil War, when people of color could vote, members of the Winn family, and what I find is most of the blacks I am researching, regardless of where they were, joined the Republican Party because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. He freed the slaves, even though if you ever read the WPA slave narratives, some of them have horrible things to say about him. They were happy that the slaves were freed, but you were freed and you had nothing. Whatever was on your back, and sometimes the slave owner didn't want you to take what shabby stuff was on your back. I've read about a man who walked from Edenton to Raleigh with no shoes in 4 days, no food, clothes were raggedy, but he just wanted to get away from where he was. And a lot of slaves didn't know what to do. So even if their former slave owner told them that they could go free or they could stay where they were, some of them stayed, even knowing they weren't going to get any pay, because they didn't, it was like, go. No, nothing else to know. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to do. And this is my imagination, but I can imagine that if you weren't in the house or if you weren't around with the folks on the land who were taking produce or cotton or whatever to be sold, you didn't have any clue about how to do business. So you didn't know what to do. You didn't know how to get the money. You just knew how to do the work. So when I'm reading, my mind starts to whirl. So in 1870, Levi Winn was made a justice of the peace, and that's this middle article here that shows that he was a justice of the peace. I don't have that article with me. Then from 1872 to 1874, Washington Winn served as a county commissioner for the county of Wayne. Do I have that on another way? I do not. And Washington Winn was also appointed a postmaster for Mount Olive May 31st of 1881, and he served until 1885. And these are a couple of articles that I found. This one says, and I can't remember which paper it came from, but it's a little snarky, I think. Our Republican friends are growing exceedingly generous towards, quote, the man and brother. Washington Winn, colored, has been appointed postmaster at Mount Olive in this county. It's a small bone, it's true, but then all the fat places belong to the white bosses. In 1897, Charles Winn was one of the first commissioners for the town of Dudley. One of the other things here that I found in the county commissioner notes or the town notes, they have to list out what the budget was or what things were paid. So it says here, it's ordered that Levi Winn Jr. be allowed $3 for making a coffin for a pauper, for someone who was poor. And then in parentheses they put, he claimed $4, so they only paid him $3 of the $4 that he requested. And another one that I don't have on there, it says, petitions of citizens of Mount Olive section for a new road from Wayne and Duplin line near A.J. Barfield's to Mount Olive via Washington Winn and James Winn's was continued to next meeting, and notice is hereby given to all parties objecting to appear at said meeting. So just like today, if we need to ask the council or the town council or the commissioners for something, we can petition, or we can go to one of them and say, this is something that I would like to see done, and they can, they'll, if they decide to put it forward, it'll end up going to committee, and notice goes out, and their notices went out in the newspaper just like our notices go out in the newspaper. So things change and things stay the same. All right. So I think just showing the same, these are some of the same things. Actually that last one, Levi Winn and two other gentlemen were appointed to a committee to condemn a site in what is listed in that paper as number 13 in the colored section. So I don't know if they had like districts with numbers on them. I don't know exactly what that means, but when I was doing my search, that popped up. Okay. So the Winn family was also considered in my opinion, to be philanthropists. They were givers. And I think you'll find that a lot of people are givers, and we don't think of ourselves as philanthropists. We give to church. We don't realize that's philanthropy. We give to the children who come and knock on the door and want to sell some paper for, to raise money for a school thing. That's philanthropy. But I think we ought to take the name and the credit for what we do. So we are philanthropists. We are philanthropy loving people. We like to give. So in 1875, Washington Winn and his second wife, Temperance or Tempe, and I found that in the census records. I've seen Tempe, Tempsey. Rarely have I seen Temperance. That I found in the marriage record. Donated 2 plots of land in Mount Olive. The first was for Winn Chapel Missionary Baptist Church. And so from the history of the church, this is the document when the land was donated to the trustees. The document said, and it's a long document, it's hard to read, real spidery writing, but it says, for the use and benefit as a place of worship for the colored people of the missionary Baptist faith, and for all others that may join them in worship of the true God. And then Washington Winn was the first pastor. And that church, for those of you who don't know, is at 110 Smith Street. It wasn't Smith Street when I was growing up. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't that. And this is a picture of the original building here. So it was a wooden building, and it was turned around. The building was turned around in 1908 to face the street because it didn't face the street originally. It was brick veneered in 1943, and so on and so forth. So he and his wife donated that land, and then they donated the land next door for a school. That school was eventually, I don't know how to put this, I'm going to say taken, for the city took it, or the county took it. I haven't quite figured it out, but it was quite a discussion back in the late 70s, early 80s newspaper articles, because there's no complete documentation of how it got from the church to the city. So the other part of the deed for the church says, for the use and benefit of a missionary Baptist church on lot or tract of land lying and being in the state and county aforesaid and in the village of Winboro on the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad just below the town of Mount Olive. So this tells us that the town of Mount Olive had not quite spread that far. So I don't know all of the land piece, when some more land was bought. Haven't delved into that. And so when the church was built, the school was built 2 years after the church, it was also built to educate all the members how to read and worship the true God. That school opened in 1880, and the first teachers were Winn family members. And I will tell you that for the Winn family, education was just as important as owning land in terms of building wealth. And as I've done my research in Raleigh on the black communities there, education was just important. And as formerly enslaved people recognized that, they knew that. You know, several of them, even though it was against the law from 1835 in North Carolina until slavery ended, to teach someone, a person of color, how to read. Um, if you were sitting in the room when the children that you were supposed to be looking after were learning how to read, you didn't close your ears. And so after slavery ended, any number of folks who had been house servants or who had had access to teaching, even though they weren't specifically the ones being taught, were ahead of the game when they started school. And schools were overrun. So I know in Raleigh, a lot of the northern missionary societies sent teachers to the South in order to teach them how to read, to teach the formerly enslaved how to read. It was a mission field for them. It was a mission field for them to convert, but it was more important at that first moment for them to learn how to read. And these white folks recognized that and came to do that. That's how Shaw University was started. That's how St. Aug was started. And I think if we start to look at the history of HBCUs, we will recognize that's why most of these schools were started, because nobody else was teaching the black children how to read, or the adults. So even at Shaw University, the classes at night for the adults were double, they would hold double the amount of people that they planned for, because that many people were showing up at the school door to learn to read. And I just find that fascinating and amazing, because you know when you go to work and you come home in the afternoon, you don't feel like going and doing all that plus some homework to get to the next step. You know, you got to do your housework, and you got to look after the kids and all of that. So when I consider the types of jobs people had, those were tiring jobs. Those were jobs that required some labor. So men and women were showing up to learn how to read and then to take that back out into the community. What I have been finding is that free blacks, artisans, people who had worked with their hands, whether they were enslaved or not, those were the people who built wealth the fastest, because they already had a trade. And if you, in Raleigh, the barbers were the people who made the most money, because they had been cutting white men's heads. So they set up shop right down the street, the next block over from the Capitol. And there were like 22 barbers on that street cutting men's hair and getting paid well for it. And here, you know, as I said, the things that the Winn family was doing, those were artisan trades. Those were things they could do with their hands. They did them well. They built furniture. They were blacksmiths. They worked in copper. They were tinsmiths. They did things that they were trained to do, and they knew they could make money doing them because there was a need. And that's the same thing any entrepreneur does today. You find the need, and you go and you fill that need. So they were smart. They were smart. We have smart families that we have come from, and that's important. We have to remind our children, our grandchildren, you came from smart people. Somebody might tell you that they weren't, but they were, because look what they endured, look what they learned, and look what they carried forward. So in 1863, 53 black heads of households in Wayne County owned property. 20 of them were artisans, and one was the widow of a cooper. And something told me what a cooper was, and I didn't write it down, so I can't tell you what that was. 13 of the 50 property owners and 5 of the 20 artisans had been apprentices. Now, I don't know, this just popped up last night, and I had already done this, so I didn't put it anywhere. But one of the newspaper articles that popped up last night said that I believe it was Washington Winn was considered to be a master apprentice, he taught his trades to others. That's right here. He was the only free black master apprentice recorded in Wayne County in 1850. So the school districts were created on April 11th of 1874, and the first district committee had, these were the members: J.W. Cox, N.G. Holland, Washington Winn, J.K. Smith, and E.B. Jordan was the chair. The school that had been built in 1881 had an additional room added to it, because originally it was one room in a frame building, and Susie Winn was added to the faculty. And in 1896, Cora Frederick Winn became a faculty member. Cora Winn was my great-grandmother. She was my grandmother's mother. In 1901, that school was called the Coley School, C-O-L-E-Y, and it remained named that way until 1912. In 1912, the name was changed to the Mount Olive Industrial High School, and then it was discontinued from 1912 to 1925. And in 1923, let me see, I might be supposed to be going on with the slides here. I forgot about them. Oh, I'll tell you about family in a minute. In 1923, a committee was formed to reorganize the high school, and 2 years later, the high school was reestablished and accredited by the State Department under the leadership of Minnie B. Winn. By December of 1939, the school had been renamed Carver High School, but that was destroyed in a fire. And during Reconstruction, the classes met in Payne Temple and in Winn Chapel Missionary Baptist Church. And the school reopened, and the class of 1941 was the first to graduate in the new building. And that new building, of course, was across Brielle. In 1947, the Carver High School was accredited by the School Southern Association and was the first school in Mount Olive to be accredited. The last Winn descendant to teach at Carver was my mother, Cliffornia Grady Wimberly, and she was there from 1951 to 1954. Is that it? So, let me share with you who we have here. I need to go back a slide. All right. So I'm starting from Washington Winn, who was married to Larky Bessonette. And that was his first wife, and she died. His second wife was Temperance Brewington. They were married in Cumberland County. That's all I can tell you about that. Their son, Levi, married Mary. I do not know Mary's maiden name. Their son, Daniel, that's where my pictures start, was Mary and Levi's son. He married Cora Frederick. And their daughter, they had, I want to say 6 children, 5 boys, and the baby was a girl, was my grandmother, Mamie Esther Winn. She married Clifford Grady from Dudley. He was a farmer, and I used to come down here and help pick strawberries in the summer. They were the best things coming out of the ground I'd ever tasted. They had 8 children. The 5th child was Cliffornia Grady. That was my mother. This is a picture of her from 1958. She married William Peel Wimberly. That's my daddy. I'm a daddy's girl. And I am the oldest of 2. I have a brother. I'm 62. He's 57, I think. And then these are just some more family pictures. So that top picture beside the word family is my grandmother. She was a spoiled girl. She'd give everything she had. She sewed for everybody in Mount Olive. She made clothes, she made band uniforms, majorette uniforms for the high schools, black and white, gowns, dresses, clothed all her children. The picture the picture on the top in the middle, on the left-hand side, that's my grandfather, and my grandmother's beside her. That is their wedding day. They eloped. She was several years younger than him. He saw her in the baby carriage and told somebody he was going to marry that girl, and he did. This is my grandfather up in the top corner and grandma right there. This picture here on the far left, grandma and grandpa are in the back in the dark, and this is their crew. So the let's see, there's Bernadine. No, that's not Bernadine. Let me look on the computer because I can't see. I believe that's Leonelle Smith. Yes, Leonelle, and then grandma. Winn was married a Lightfoot. She lived in D.C. Grandpa, beside grandpa is my aunt B. Bernadine, she lived in Lumberton. In front of Nell is Arnett. She was married to Gambrell. And as I said, the tall one there is Gwen. The little girl with her head kind of like that is my mama. And Doris is the last one in that row. And then kneeling down on the bottom is, I'm sorry, that's Arnett kneeling at the bottom. The left middle, that is Lavonde Driver. She is the only child still living. And the little boy is CF. And then the picture below that is them all together for a family function. The black and white picture of the man and woman, that's grandma and grandpa again. That is the back of their house that was on Lee's Country Club Road. It was right there on the corner. That's my mother again. Underneath my mother, that is the front porch of the house that was on Lee's Country Club Road. That's my mom, my dad, and my brother and myself, probably in 1964, 65. This is my family without my mother. She was inducted into the Raleigh Hall of Fame. She was very much a community activist in Raleigh, on the school board, fussed about stuff that needed to be fussed about, and was an educator for quite a long while. And those are my two girls, my dad and my brother. And then the young lady who has on the blue and green shirt with the glasses on the corner here, this is my aunt Lavonde McNeil Driver, and she is the last living of the Grady girls, as they were called and known here in Mount Olive. I'm sorry, I forgot to cut that off. And she will be 87, I believe, in September. And she normally comes to Mount Olive and talks, but she's had a few health challenges here lately, so we have tried to hold her down, but you know how it is, trying to hold folks down when they want to go do stuff. Mm-hmm. So the last slide I have for you is the resources that I used. And as I said, I'm happy to send this report to anybody who wants it, and I have the list of resources at the end. And if I'm going to get to questions in a minute, I'm going to leave this screen up last. If anybody wants to contact me, this is my email, my website, my phone number. I don't know a lot of answers, but I know how to research. I know how to find stuff or send people in the right direction. So if you have questions that I cannot answer, I will certainly be happy to try to find what I can. I've even started figuring out how to dig in Ancestry for other people's stuff than just mine. So that's all I've got for you. If I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do so. Yes, ma'am.
Well, there's a Granny's barbecue in Dudley now.
He says he's not related to us.
Really?
I don't believe it because he has my granddaddy's ears.
Yeah.
I read that article, and one of my aunts from Washington, she was the genealogist of the family, and she has written several books, but she did more Grady work than she did Winn. So whenever she would come, she would go, and we have a picture of her. I think it's one of the last pictures that was taken before she got sick. And she's coming out of Grady's barbecue, and Grady's barbecue name is up there, and she's doing like this. She is holding on to that barbecue like somebody's gonna take it from her. So my girls and I saw the article in the News and Observer, and I was like, I never heard of them. So as soon as it was safe, we went to visit, and he had had COVID and had been sick for quite a while, and it was his first week back. And so he came and sat down and shared things with me. And, he's like, my family's from Seven Springs. I remember going to visit Seven Springs when I was a little girl and, going to the falls of the Neuse to swim and all that kind of stuff. So I understand that he is related to another young lady that I know in Raleigh. And so when I get a minute, I'm going to call her and go, okay, you need to tell me. Because nobody else in Dudley is going to have my granddaddy's ears and not be related to him. You know what I'm saying? You look and you go, well, we connected in this somewhere. So, yes, sir.
Let me say, a national magazine, I think it's GQ, did an article on Mr. Grady's barbecue. They found me in the United States.
Okay.
Huge article.
I have to look that up.
And I was gonna share, where they're located. I guess it's Seven Springs, because it'll lead you out to Seven Springs
Mm-hmm.
when you go to Grady's barbecue, but up and down that road there, so,
We have family all up and down. We have land all up and down there.
Right there. I know that my great granddad, as well as my granddad, they would help me. So they had a shared relationship, like the family shared a closeness. I think they are. I don't know.
I think they got to be cousins.
I think
There's
so.
some kind of connection in there. And he knew, we had a cousin there named Bernie Grady. And so when I was talking to him, he was like, oh, Mr. Bernie. And I was like, his house is right down there. And I was like, I drove past looking for the house. I couldn't find it. Didn't realize it was so overgrown. Dudley, in fact, Bernie, so I'm going to spin over to the Grady's here for a minute. Bernie, my mom sat down with him one day and just asked him questions. And she wrote all the answers down and typed, I know she had her secretary type them up because she didn't type. But, so we have all of the questions and answers. And he sat there and drew a map of Dudley from when he was growing up. Who lived where, which people were black, which ones were white, what people grew, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm always so excited when I find another little piece, even if I don't know where it fits in, because it's just so exciting to know what you know. And they taught us this stuff, and I feel really fortunate because a lot of families didn't tell stuff. And I've met one lady one day that was from South Carolina, and she said, I don't know anything about my family. They all left. I don't know what caused them to leave. She said nobody in the family, none of the elders would speak of it. So whatever it was so horrible that they didn't ever want to talk about it again. And while I understand that, it's like, then you just kind of you're wallowing out there and you don't know anything. You don't know health stuff. You don't know the history of it. And we can't lose our history. I often say that my history is our history. We all share history. It doesn't matter what color we are. It doesn't matter what religion or any of that we are. We all share the history of this country. And we need to all be proud of it and tell every bit of it. We just have to tell the truth. And we have to start, making people realize it's the truth piece. We can't decide we want to hear this piece and we don't want to hear that piece, because all of it goes like this. Yes, ma'am.
Did the Grady's also in Dudley have a country store? 'Cause I remember
They had a country store on the corner. You're too young to remember that. There was a country store right there on the corner of Briazel and Lee's Country Club. It wasn't called Lee's Country Club then because it was that was still in the that was out right outside the city limits. But it was I think it was an Exxon station. I have two pictures of it that one of my cousins found last year, but I didn't bring them with me. But I remember the remains of that store, just because it was falling apart. And shortly before my mother died, we had someone to go and look at the property, and an engineer, because the gas station had been there. There was some gasoline that had leaked into the ground, and we were fortunate. There are grants from the state, and they were able to clean that up and pay for it. We didn't have to, because the cost of doing that is tremendous. And it's it was there. I never got to go in it. That's what I'm saying. I know I'm older than you, so.
I remember my uncle talking about, race, about race country stores. I thought it was a Dudley though.
Well, there may have been one in Dudley as well. I know that there was one on the corner of there in Mount Olive. And the other kind of neat thing, Mama used to tell me about, they would send the children up there, to work some, and when they weren't helping Grandpa, because he was a truck farmer, so he would raise his produce and then drive it to Raleigh to the market in Raleigh to sell. Yes, sir.
I'll ask you to go back to the name Winn, and I know you started at the Adam Winn, but have you done the research to find out where did he get the name from? I noticed that you say that the King of England deeded him the land, but
My mama and them did the research, and they would go to Apex, to the Mormon church, and use their resources. The sister who held on to all of the stuff that they wrote down died. Her son has died. His wife doesn't remember where any of that stuff is. So all I have is whatever little handwritten notes she had. And as I said, I just have not had time to go back and dig. So what was in here, a lot of that kind of stuff that was that far back was stuff that they found with the help of the folks who own Ancestry at the Mormon Church.
well, the true history book suggests that as black folk were free, who was just named John Bob or whatever, they took the name of slave owner.
Right.
I have taken, I've at different times have had the license, whatever you call it, to look into the ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been able to go back around 1845 and find the first names of some of the family members that I heard their names when I was really young. And, but down in, out of Tar Heel, in Blaine County, out of Tar Heel, Hill and I were driving back and forth between Rose Hill and Fayetteville, and I learned to take a back road. So one day I'm riding and I see this massive headstone. Obviously not owned by anyone black, but his name was Peter S. Cromartie, and that's the name that my great granddad, and that name has come down through time. But obviously, and then it showed all the, and then it did show the first Cromartie, who were white, which was slave owners, who deeded them the land. And it sure was people of power from England, probably the king on level. And so
I'm getting up. I got to write while you talk.
It's a fascinating trail. I've never taken the time to follow the trail deep enough.
I have not followed, but they were adamant when they said it, and I knew better than to cross those women when they told me something. So I have, like I said, I have not had time to dig, but when you say Cromartie, I know we've got some Cromarties in the family, we've got Carnegies in the family, so who knows? And so if you email me and tell me to look it up.
Cromartie, it grew out of the Elizabeth town area.
Okay.
I think when those people were slaves or freed or run away, legend is that my great granddad ran away.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar cane plantation, but they took the name of whomever owned them, and so that name, there was a branch of Pro Martin that went west out towards Rayford and Red Spring. And then my son family tree stayed on the 87 between Fayetteville and Elizabethtown. That's the southern part of my family. But I figured that if some went towards Rayford out that way, some stayed near Fayetteville. Then the Crow Martins that I have come in contact with over here, I figured that was a branch that probably took the name and sprang this way. So it's very. There's a trail to be followed, we just haven't taken the time.
Yeah.
But
I don't know that I ever would have started to dig as deeply as I did, but I came home on disability. I worked at the legislature. I wrote the Journal for the House of Representatives for 20 some years. And I came home on disability in 2011, intending to go back to work, and realized that Mom and Daddy were sick and I needed to stay home. So in 2012, my aunt from DC came down, and there were 5 of the sisters together, and they talked me into having a family reunion. They had always planned them, and in the process, I thought, it'd be nice to know a little bit more. Hey, Miss Geraldine. I just realized who you were under the mask, and so I started digging. That was the first time I'd ever looked at Ancestry or any, I'd seen the books that Mama had stuck under the table, but I didn't question any of it. I just was like, whatever. But as I've gotten older, it's more important to me to share and to tell others, because I find that we don't tell it, and we don't and we don't write it down. And I don't even care if you write it down anymore. Just about everybody's got a cell phone or access to something that can record. I like having the voice saying it to me. So I've been telling friends as they're celebrating people's birthdays, I'm like, while you're celebrating, take your telephone and hit that record button and let them talk all they want to, because we have got to save our history. And it's just important. And so when I hear a little bit of something else, then I pull it out. I pull out a piece of paper, or I'll say, do you mind me recording this? And I'll start recording. And I don't even care. It doesn't even have to be my family anymore. I just want to know. So, yes, ma'am.
Have you seen the mile marker that's dedicated to our ancestor, Adam Winn?
To the Winds? They moved it.
No, I haven't seen it. I've seen a picture of it, but I didn't.
So where they originally put it, evidently they moved the road or they did something. And so my aunt was down here, I guess about 5 or 6 months ago, and she was really upset because she had spearheaded the drive to get it and helped raise the money to put it up, and nobody notified the family that it had been moved. So and they had put a box, a time capsule underneath it. So she doesn't know. We don't know if the time capsule got moved, and then she got sick. So nobody's had time to look any further. But
Where did they move it?
it's yeah.
It's right off of Brazil too.
Yeah, it's still in Brazil, but it's just not where it was originally put.
Yeah.
So
And you
Little.
you can really ask, like, when you, by the time it catches your eye, you've already gone past it. But it's like before you get to the Boys and Girls Club, like it's literally in the corner of that parking lot, like at a turn. Yeah.
and I think as I get older, I think about things. So I was down here for something a couple of months ago, and I realized I had not been to my grandparents' graves since they were buried. I couldn't remember where the cemetery was. So I put it in Google and kind of piddled around. I finally found the road way back down there. It's like, if you don't know where you're going, you don't know.
Are
And
they
then-
in Carver too?
The one behind Carver.
They're in Carver?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went to that one, and then we drove to Dudley, and I told my children, I said, I've never been to the cemetery in Dudley. I knew where First Congregation was, and we would just go straight down the road to Cousin Bernie's. So then I started digging, and finally we found that cemetery, and I was like, okay, I know y'all are sick of me getting out of the car and taking pictures of headstones, so I'm gonna have to come back down here without you, because I just need to walk it. I need to know who's where and what's what.
Were any of the Winns instrumental in, starting, the First Congregational Church in Dublin?
I don't know about Winns. I know the Grady's were. I'm sure there were, because as I'm reading, like I said, I was telling you, I think there's been some intermarriage way back there, because I see Winns and Grady's in Dudley. I see Winns and Grady's in Mount Olive, and who knows where else. And it was against the law for people who were free people of color to marry white or slaves. So if you were surrounded by your own people, I guess, I don't know how that worked. I know they used to scare us and tell us we couldn't fall in love with our cousins, because we'd be crazy, or our children would come out crazy or something. So,
My great-grandparents are first cousins.
okay.
And it gets really tricky because it gets really tricky for me when I introduce the Hendersons, because I have brothers marrying sisters, and then first cousins marrying first cousins on top of that, and how they came from Mount Olive, I'm not quite sure. But I do know from what I've, like, oral history, I guess, that's been passed down, a lot of it, as far as Dudley is concerned, was to keep land with family with family. And I say that because there's a lot of outside children. And so, with that being said, I think outside of just geographical, because you can't drive, right? You can't go anywhere. You see the same people, you're around the same people, and then if you're trying to, I would imagine for my family, being in Dudley, having lost so much from Mount Olive, they wanted to keep as much as they could, because even now, to this day, they're still very cliquish. They're very particular about who you marry. Not so much for my generation, but like my aunts and uncles, very much so. My grandma and my granddaddy, very much so. I had never figured out how my grandma and my granddaddy met, because my great grandma is from like out in Eureka, but they ended up living on Short Street. She was a mother at Wynn's Chapel. She's very well respected at Wynn's Chapel, and I never could figure out how in the world she got down here. And my grandma married my granddad. My granddad was Roosevelt, so he stayed right there on Sweet Creek Road. And I've never figured that out, but I know that they're very, they keep everything close. They keep everything close. Land, they keep a lot close. So when it comes to some history, I think that we haven't been told because of that. It can be looked down. I guess it's frowned upon. Some people frown upon it. It was always just told to me that it was to keep land with the family. So I don't know. All the way down, I was going to ask the question about the, I can't remember who you said it was that had the sons that he offered for slavery.
Adam.
Was it Adam?
Adam.
Okay, so, because I've seen, Lisa gave a presentation about 3 years ago at Jonesboro, and she really was talking about just landowners in Wayne County in general. And that issue came up, she kind of shared a little bit about it, but it was presented in a manner of like, he sent them out for apprenticeships, right? Or he sent them out to work, and with the understanding that they would come back. Slavery wouldn't necessarily use, so I don't know if that's because they didn't want to.
She put it in one of her blogs. That's where I got it from.
And then the James Jernigan, because she also, in that same time, was talking about how they were known for, they would kind of take slaves and sell them, or take people, free people and sell them, that they knew were not slaves. So it's hard to, I find it hard in my research to differentiate between like what may be a bias, you know what I mean, as opposed to what really happened. And so how do you come to the conclusion, or how do you differentiate, like, how are you able to tell what is, you know, because it's hard, it's very hard, and I mean, I don't have the time to like really, you know, like find people and say, hey, do you have this, this, and this? But it's hard, because I don't think that I would be able to find a fair shape of an article in Wayne County. I do not believe that. I think that if I were to look to see like, hey, did this man really, you know, have his kids out for slavery, or was it some shady businesses going on? Because my family does have a history of gambling. I think that is safe to say. I don't know how do you do that?
I didn't know about the slavery until Mama went to talk to the DAR. She did a talk with them, and she had the research. But like I said, I have not dug it. She's got boxes of stuff. I have one aunt that's got 3 or 4 of those big, huge boxes of things. And so I just take the parts that I have time to get to. And she had it written somewhere. So I felt sure that she would not have mentioned it if she didn't have something to back it up. So.
Well, when you're doing your research, do you first approach the register of deeds, or do you approach the library first? Which is it? If you were just in any county, I mean, Blade, whatever, that's where I would, if I have the time, that's where I would go research first. Which
So
would be
what I started with literally was Ancestry. I did the Ancestry.com when I started in 2012. I started with that, and I got excited when the little green leaves would start whirling and open up. And so I would take the leaves and I would click and see what it was. So if it was a census record, I would read that census record. And if it was something that I didn't know or didn't understand, I would, in fact, at that point, I was just trying to attach names and dates, birth dates and death dates and things like that. So I was looking, and I was also, because it was a family reunion, trying to put together a list of a health history, a medical history for my family. So I could go back, and if I could find a death certificate, sometimes the death certificate, you know, it has information from the informant, and so I could figure out what somebody died of, so I'd figure out, well, do we need to look out for heart disease, or, you know, that kind of stuff, high blood pressure, but it would also give me the other information. And I probably shouldn't assume that those things were correct, but if enough of them begin to corroborate each other, then I'm comfortable with holding on to that. As I've gotten older and I'm digging in more things, I'm taking all the elders' boxes of newspapers and pictures and things that they've written on this little scrap of paper, or circled in an article, or written on something, and I'm putting those pieces together. And then I work with my cousins. There are 30-some, 40-some of us, and several of us do genealogy. And so, like I said, I don't have time to do a lot, but we have figured out which of us we trust enough that's keeping the important stuff. So I know my Aunt Gwen's children have the best stuff because she was the genealogist. So I might go to one of them's house and go, okay, let me go through here and just take pictures of everything you got, or let me pack up a box of stuff to take with me home and scan. And then I can take those things and I go to newspapers.com and I start searching for newspaper articles, particularly for the Winn family, because their names show up. Some people's names don't show up, but when I go and find things, I can find other dates to corroborate to other stuff. And I have not been to the Register of Deeds office here in Wayne County. I do a lot of that when I'm in Raleigh, because that's where my focus has been thus far. But the book that I've written for Raleigh it's going to be published by Arcadia Press, and I've already talked to them about, because I don't see one, that they have not done one for Wayne County.
So one last question.
Mm-hmm.
If you were looking at, can we assume that all the recorded information in every county lines up at some archive in model? Is that
No,
Wishful thinking?
no, that is wishful thinking. I hate to say it, but if you have a library in your county that has an archive section, I would check it. I would not count I don't count anything out. I just try to double check my sources if I can.
This is a question for our librarian. Is there any published document showing similar activities like this is going to be around the county? February, is there anything printed by the newspaper, anything else?
We have the book that you mentioned earlier about the Wayne County history. Goldsboro has the history room, the main library in Goldsboro. We just don't have the space here. The little bitty corner that they give us for local history, we have more of the Mount Olive stuff here, but we just have to sit down and go through it, Mr. Marty. Because it's hard to even know what's over there, because people have donated things. There's photo albums, a lot of yearbooks, and things like that. But the oldest stuff is in Goldsboro, because they have that big, huge local history room, and so they mainly keep most of the stuff there in Goldsboro.
And I will tell you, so in Raleigh, the Wake County History Library, their storage room is the size of this room. And there was one lady, Elizabeth Reed Murray, who just made her life's work Wake County history. And I went over there looking for like a couple of things the other day, and I would throw out this name and I would throw out this area of town. And finally the librarian said, "Come on back here, let me show you." And she took me in the back room, and there were 3 stacks, the shelves, just of that one lady's boxes of folders. And I thought I had a lot of trash in my children, if I don't do something with it, I've already had to say, this stuff, you just donate it to the historical library, because they'll figure out what to do with it. But most of the stuff is not scanned, it's handwritten, where she wrote notes, but she has written 2 volumes on Wake County, this thick. And it was funny, because one of the librarians said to me, she brought the 2 books. She said, "Hey, you should start with these." I said, "I have those at home, and they have sticky notes sticking out like every page, because I'm working from freedmen's villages and trying to build a history of Black Raleigh from before slavery ended, up to as far to the present as I can." And I have found stuff that's, it was done, and nobody did anything with it. Like, there's a book that was written, supposed to be an architectural digest of homes in Black neighborhoods in Raleigh. And I found, they interviewed 70 people. I found the interview of Clarence Leitner, who was our only Black mayor, online at UNC. It was 44 pages long. There are maybe 2 pages in this 100 and some page book out of that 44-page interview. Everybody's interview, because we found the cassette tapes, were hour to an hour and a half long interviews. None of that stuff was typed back in the 80s and stuck in a file somewhere. So nobody knows it's there. And they don't have a copy machine for me to copy it with. So when I go look at it, I take my phone and I have to take pictures of everything and come back home and print them out. So all of our history's not been erased. Somebody just put it in a box somewhere and didn't do anything else with it. So we really have to look. So I try to make friends with the librarians. I try to make friends with the folks who...
And I will say too, I've always heard any genealogy, you start with the census. But like you said, and everybody says, the problem with that is the spelling. You have to think about how your name could have been misspelled, or what somebody could have thought it sounded like. So it's...
And the
it can be
Winn
very
thing could have come
frustrating.
from that, could have just come from somebody spelled it this way and somebody spelled it. When I got married, my husband's brother, I said, I took him to the hospital for something, and they had him as Couthen. His last name on the record was Cauthen. He didn't see any reason to correct it because that's what the records had at the hospital, but that wasn't official. So how many instances of that kind of thing has happened? So we just don't know. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm sitting from Adam's son, Ray Winn.
Mhm.
Do you have any information about what his occupation, I was listening to your presentation. Do you have any information about what Ray Winn's occupation was?
I couldn't tell you because I haven't looked.
Okay.
I've seen Gray Winn's name in a lot of places. Cumberland County, have you seen him in Cumberland County?
I'm sorry?
Have you seen him in Cumberland County?
Mm-mm.
Was Gray married to Penny?
No, I think Gray married, he was either, Penny or Betsy, I think was his wife's name.
One of them.
Yeah.
Somebody ended up in Cumberland.
I think he married Betsy because Betsy and Penny were sisters.
Okay.
And I can't see their maiden name. But anyway.
Yeah. But if I find any, make sure that
Okay.
either you put your name on a list
Yeah,
or
yeah.
I just
Or
want to
get
let
my
everybody
email.
know before anybody else leaves, we did record this, so we will be posting this to, the Wayne County Library YouTube channel. So you just go on YouTube, type in Wayne County Public Library in the search box. You should see Ms. Cauthen's face hopefully on the video if everything worked, fingers crossed. So, and I just want to thank you for
well,
coming.
thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
You know,
I have no